The day started like any other, with a sense of calm filling the house. I was in my room, sorting through my wardrobe to find something suitable to wear for a last-minute dinner plan. Living with my husband and his teenage son, Ryan, had been a journey full of adjustments. Ryan was 17, a bright but somewhat reserved kid, still finding his way after his parents' divorce. Our relationship had its ups and downs, but I'd always tried to make him feel like part of the family. That afternoon, I assumed everyone was either busy or out of the house. I closed my bedroom door, thinking I had the privacy to quickly change. As I picked out a dress and started slipping into it, the unthinkable happened. The door creaked open. My heart skipped a beat as I turned, startled to see Ryan standing there, his eyes wide with confusion and embarrassment. "Ryan?" I exclaimed, quickly grabbing a nearby blanket to cover myself. "What are you doing?" He stammered. I thought Dad was in here. I didn't know." His face flushed as he stepped back, clearly horrified by the situation. In that instant, a wave of emotions rushed through me: shock, embarrassment, and frustration. But beyond that, I noticed something deeper. Ryan wasn't just mortified. He looked genuinely upset, almost as if he'd made a mistake that would haunt him. My mind raced. Was this just a careless moment, or was there something else troubling him? I managed to compose myself and said softly, "Ryan, let's talk about this." But before I could say more, he bolted, muttering a quick apology as he disappeared down the hallway. Left standing in the middle of the room, I was torn between anger and concern. Something about his reaction didn't sit right with me. Why was he looking for his father in my room? Was he carrying some burden he hadn't shared? Or was it just an innocent mix-up? The incident left a heavy air hanging in the house, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a simple accident. Little did I know, that moment would unravel a series of truths that none of us were prepared to face. Later that evening, I couldn't stop replaying the incident in my head. Ryan's reaction wasn't just awkward, it was almost like he was scared or overwhelmed by something. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was probably just a teenager being a teenager, but a small voice inside me wouldn't let it go. Was there something going on in his life that I didn't know about? Dinner that night was tense. My husband, Mark, sat at the table, oblivious to the strange energy between Ryan and me. Ryan barely said a word, poking at his food and keeping his head down. Every time I glanced at him, he avoided eye contact, his shoulders hunched like he was carrying the weight of the world. Mark eventually broke the silence. "Ryan, how's school? Everything okay?" Ryan mumbled a quick, "Fine," without looking up. Mark shrugged it off, moving on to talk about his day, but I couldn't ignore the way Ryan's hands trembled slightly as he held his fork. Something was definitely bothering him, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was related to what happened earlier. After dinner, I decided to check on him. Knocking gently on his door, I called out, "Ryan, can I come in?" There was a long pause before he replied, "Yeah, sure." When I entered, he was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. His room was dimly lit, the walls covered in posters of his favorite bands, but the usual chaos of teenage clutter seemed unusually tidy tonight. "Ryan," I began cautiously, sitting on the chair by his desk. "About earlier. I just want to make sure you're okay. You seemed upset." He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "It's nothing," he muttered, but his voice cracked ever so slightly, and I could see a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. Whatever he was holding back, it was eating at him. "I don't think it's nothing," I said gently. "You can talk to me, you know. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." Ryan hesitated, his lips parting as if to say something, but then he stopped himself. "I can't," he whispered, looking away. And with that, The wall between us felt higher than ever. I left Ryan's room feeling uneasy, his words echoing in my mind. I can't. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the way he said them, like he was trapped in something he couldn't explain. I wanted to talk to Mark about it, but I hesitated. Mark had a way of brushing off concerns about Ryan, chalking everything up to teenage mood swings. I knew if I brought it up without solid proof, he'd just tell me I was overthinking. So, for now, I kept it to myself. The next morning, I decided to pay more attention to Ryan, hoping to pick up on anything that might explain his behavior. He left for school in a hurry, barely touching his breakfast. His usual routine of texting on his phone or joking about the latest viral video was gone, replaced by silence and distant stares. Something had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it. Later that day, while tidying up the living room, I noticed his backpack tossed on the couch. I knew it wasn't right to invade his privacy, but a part of me needed answers. Carefully, I unzipped the bag, pretending I was just organizing his things. Inside, I found his textbooks and notebooks, but what caught my eye was a crumpled piece of paper stuffed into a side pocket. Unfolding it, I saw what looked like a handwritten note. The words were hurriedly scrawled, almost angry. I can't keep doing this. I don't know who to trust anymore. My heart sank. What was Ryan dealing with? And why hadn't he come to either Mark or me for help? That evening, I made another attempt to reach him. Ryan, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? I asked as we sat on the couch, the TV playing softly in the background. He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Yeah, I know. I sighed, unsure of how to bridge the gap. I found a note in your bag, I admitted carefully. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and something else, fear. You went through my stuff? He asked, his voice rising. Why would you do that? I wasn't trying to snoop, I said quickly, but I'm worried about you. What's going on, Ryan? Please, talk to me. He stood up abruptly, his fists clenched. You don't understand. No one does. And just like that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me with more questions than ever. Ryan's outburst lingered in my mind long after he stormed out. The fear in his eyes wasn't just from being caught off guard. It felt deeper, like he was guarding something far more serious than I had imagined. I decided to give him space, hoping he'd come to me when he was ready. But as the days passed, his behavior only became more erratic. He started avoiding meals, staying locked in his room, and barely speaking to either Mark or me. Mark noticed the change, too, though he didn't seem as concerned. Teenagers go through phases, he said one night as we cleaned up after dinner. He'll snap out of it. But I wasn't so sure. There was a darkness in Ryan's demeanor that couldn't be dismissed as just a phase. A few nights later, I was woken by a faint noise coming from downstairs. The clock read 2:14 a.m. Groggily, I got out of bed and tiptoed to the hallway, careful not to wake Mark. The sound grew louder as I descended the stairs. A quiet rustling, like someone searching for something. When I reached the living room, I froze. There was Ryan, sitting on the floor with his back to me, his hands trembling as he rifled through a box of old family photos. The light from a nearby lamp cast long shadows across the room, making the scene feel even more unsettling. Ryan? I said softly, not wanting to startle him. He whipped around, his face pale and his eyes wild. I wasn't doing anything, he blurted, his voice shaking. It's okay, I said, stepping closer. I'm not upset. I'm worried about you. What's going on? For a moment, I thought he might finally open up. His shoulders sagged, and his lips parted as if he was about to speak, but then, just as quickly, he shut down. You wouldn't get it, he muttered, shoving the photos back into the box and standing up. Try me, I urged, blocking his path. Whatever this is, You don't have to deal with it alone. Ryan looked at me then, his expression a mixture of anger and pain. It's not that simple, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There are things I can't tell you, things that would change everything. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. What could possibly be so terrible that he felt he couldn't trust me? Before I could ask, he pushed past me and disappeared up the stairs, leaving the house in an eerie silence. After Ryan disappeared up the stairs, I stood in the living room, staring at the box of photos he'd left behind. His words echoed in my mind, things that would change everything. What could he possibly mean? My hands trembled as I knelt down and opened the box. Inside were familiar pictures, family vacations, birthdays, and old snapshots of Mark and Ryan from before I came into their lives. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but Ryan's frantic behavior made it clear there was something I was missing. I picked up a photo of Mark and Ryan from years ago, taken at a park. They looked so carefree, so happy. As I turned it over, I noticed a faint pencil mark on the back. It wasn't a date or a caption, but a symbol, something that resembled an X, scratched hastily into the corner. My stomach churned. Why would Ryan be so desperate to find this? The next day, I decided to confront Mark. He was drinking his morning coffee, scrolling through his phone when I placed the photo in front of him. "What's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced at it and shrugged. "It's an old picture of me and Ryan." "Why?" "There's a mark on the back," I said, flipping it over to show him. "Ryan was looking for it last night. He's been acting strange, Mark. I think this means something to him." Mark's face darkened as he stared at the mark, his jaw tightening. "It's nothing," he said quickly, but his tone was unconvincing. "Nothing?" I pressed. "Ryan doesn't seem to think so. He's scared, Mark. Whatever this is, he's holding on to it like his life depends on it." Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's probably just a phase. You know how teenagers are. They get obsessed with random things." But his dismissive tone didn't sit right with me. There was something he wasn't telling me. That evening, while Mark was in his office, I decided to dig deeper. Ryan had left for soccer practice, so I went back to his room. I knew it wasn't right to invade his space, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head with something. I opened his desk drawer and found a small leather-bound journal. The edges were frayed, and it looked like it had been flipped through 1,000 times. I hesitated, but then I remembered the desperation in Ryan's eyes. I opened it, my hands shaking. Inside, the pages were filled with chaotic handwriting. Most of it didn't make sense. Fragments of thoughts, drawings of the same X symbol, and phrases like, "I can't let them find out," and "it's all connected." My heart raced as I turned page after page, trying to piece it all together. Then I saw it, a name written over and over again, Carla. I froze. Carla was Mark's ex-wife, Ryan's biological mother. He rarely talked about her, and Mark had always brushed off any questions about their past. But why was Ryan so fixated on her now? Suddenly, I heard the front door slam. Ryan was home. I shoved the journal back into the drawer and stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. He was calling out for Mark, his voice urgent. I stepped into the hallway, trying to act normal. "Ryan, is everything okay?" He looked up at me, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "Where's Dad?" he asked, his voice trembling. "He's in his office," I said, my stomach knotting. "What's wrong?" Ryan didn't answer. Instead, he ran upstairs, his footsteps echoing through the house. I stood frozen, the weight of the journal and the photo pressing down on me. Whatever was happening, it was far bigger than I'd imagined, and I was no longer sure who I could trust. Ryan's footsteps pounded up the stairs, and I followed quickly, my heart racing. He burst into Mark's office without knocking, startling him. "Dad," Ryan said breathlessly, "I need to talk to you, now." Mark looked up from his desk, confused but concerned. "Ryan, what's going on?" I lingered by the doorway, unsure if I should step in or give them space. But Ryan's next words froze me in place. "It's about Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I found something." Mark's face turned pale. "Ryan, we've talked about this. There's nothing more to know about your mother. She made her choices, and we've moved on." "No," Ryan said firmly, his fists clenched. "You've moved on, but I haven't. I found her letters." "Letters?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. Both of them turned to me, and I immediately regretted speaking. Ryan hesitated, then pulled a bundle of crumpled envelopes from his jacket pocket. "I found these hidden in the attic," he said, his voice shaking. "She wrote them before she left. She said she didn't want to go, Dad. She said she was scared of you." Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's enough, Ryan," he said sharply. "You don't understand the full story." "Then tell me," Ryan shouted. "All I've ever heard is your side. But these letters, they don't match what you've told me." The room fell silent, the tension so thick it felt hard to breathe. Mark's face twisted, a mix of anger and guilt. "Your mother," he began, then stopped, struggling for words. "She didn't leave because of me," he said finally, his voice low. "She left because she was involved in something dangerous. She was protecting you." Ryan's eyes filled with tears. "Protecting me? From what?" Mark hesitated again, and I realized he was holding something back. "From the people she worked for," he said slowly. "She got caught up in something illegal. I didn't want you to know because I wanted to protect the way you remembered her." Ryan shook his head in disbelief. "You lied to me. All this time?" Mark stepped closer, his voice softening. "I lied because I didn't want you to carry her burden. But if you found her letters, then maybe it's time you knew the truth." Before Mark could say more, Ryan's phone buzzed loudly, breaking the tension. He glanced at it and his face went white. "It's from an unknown number," he whispered, holding it up. The message read, "You're closer than you think. Stop digging, or else." All three of us stared at the screen, the weight of the message sinking in. Whatever Ryan's mother had been involved in wasn't buried in the past. It was still very much alive, and now it was coming for us. The room fell into a stunned silence as Ryan clutched his phone, his knuckles white. Mark reached for it, his expression a mix of dread and urgency. "Let me see," he said, and Ryan hesitated before handing it over. Mark's face darkened as he read the message. "This isn't over," he murmured, almost to himself. I stepped closer, trying to steady my voice. "Mark, what does this mean? Who sent that?" Mark exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging under the weight of whatever he was about to reveal. "Your mother wasn't just running from bad people," he said, looking directly at Ryan. "She was helping them, laundering money, hiding assets. When she tried to back out, things got dangerous. I told her to leave for your safety, but she stayed in touch with them longer than I realized. This message, it's from someone tied to her past." Ryan's face was a mix of shock and confusion. "But why now? Why are they coming after us?" "Because you've been digging," Mark said, his voice grim. "They probably think you found something incriminating." I stepped forward, placing a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "If they're still watching, they're trying to scare us. But we can get ahead of this. We'll go to the authorities." Mark nodded reluctantly. "It's the only way. We'll give them everything we know. All the letters, all the information. It's the only way to stop this for good." Ryan hesitated, then looked at both of us. I don't want to lose anyone else. We have to do this together. The three of us spent the next few hours gathering everything we could. It wasn't easy, but for the first time, it felt like we were finally confronting the shadows of the past instead of running from them. By the end, Ryan sat quietly, clutching one of his mother's letters. I just wanted to understand her, he said softly. I didn't mean to put us in danger. You didn't, I said, kneeling beside him. You're brave for wanting the truth, and now we'll make sure it doesn't haunt us anymore. As the sun rose, the tension in the house began to ease. We weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time, we were facing the future as a family, stronger, united, and ready for whatever came next.